Hello everyone and welcome back. Apologies that I am in the exact same outfit as I was in the last video. I usually wouldn't do that, but alas, I have nothing to change into. So if you haven't watched my last video, do check it out. It's all about my pivot to book editing as a career, which is exciting. But today I'm going to be talking to you about my June and July books that I read. June and July, because in June I got stuck in one long book and basically didn't read all that much at all. I did finish out my How to Read and Analyse a Novel course that month, so I did read a couple more books that I'm going to show you in this stack. Sorry, I'm just looking at my phone because I'm going to make sure I've got all the books here. I reread Born by Jeff Vandermeer and I also reread Gifts by Ursula Le Guin, both of which I recommend, obviously. I do love Gifts. I think that's such a beautiful book. While we're here, actually, I've been running a slow read of John Crowley's Little Big, and I've been loving it. It's been so rewarding. It's been very enjoyable. It's such a fabulous book to do a slow read on. Basically, every day we read a few pages. I make a little podcast style thing that readers can listen to. If you're interested, I will leave links to that down below. The first 3 episodes, if you will, are free to listen to if you want to see if you like that kind of thing. So this is my big old stack. So I obviously read quite a bit in July. Sadly, I've not had that great of a summer of reading, which is annoying because I do love my summer reading. But I've just had a few duds. And then when I wrote my reviews, I was actually like, oh, quite a lot of these I would recommend. None of them have really lit me on fire, apart from one. I'm coming out of this phase now, thankfully. But I'm going to start doing a thing. I don't know if I'm going to continue doing this thing, but I'm going to start doing a thing called Featured Book of the Month. And this month it's Gathering Evidence by Martin MacInnes, which I actually technically finished in the first few days of August. It took me a while to get through it just because I was distracted by other reading projects that I had going on. But this is by far my favourite thing that I read in the last couple of months and may make its way onto my top books of 2025. Sometimes you just come across a book which is like your taste personified, or at least like one part of my taste, which is these like uncanny, weird, cerebral novels. And this is that for me. And considering I now love both In Ascension and this book, Martin MacInnes is very quickly becoming a very important author to me. So I really want to read Infinite Ground, which is his other novel, as soon as possible. But I also need him to write something else. Martin, please, if you can hear me. This is just perfect for me, but I know that it won't have all the fans in the world. So it follows a couple, and John is dropping Shell off at the airport. It's very foggy and misty outside in a kind of strange and uncanny way. The roads are like weirdly empty. They arrive at the airport and it's chaos there. And all the planes are grounded, presumably because of the fog, but we don't really know. But Shell is determined to get on a flight, and she's determined because she has been offered a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to observe the last population of chimpanzee bonobos, or bonobo chimpanzees. I think she's a specialist in primate diet or something. The park that the bonobos live in is closed to the public these days, so it's very hard to get access to these creatures, and she and a team of other women scientists have been called in to investigate the troop because 2 of the individuals have been found dead. So that's why she's been called in. She's desperate to go on this research trip, and she manages to get herself on a plane. She gives John a quick kiss goodbye and she's gone. John feels this kind of low-level anxiety now she's left. He decides to visit the home that they're building together, and whilst he's there, something happens to him. Something attacks him as he's looking at the plot of their new house, and he wakes up in this like weirdly blank house and is visited daily by a doctor. The doctor says he can't go back to the hospital, he has no means of communication, and he can't remember anything about either the accident or the attack or his life before waking up in this house. This book is genuinely pretty frightening. Like, I don't think I've ever been so scared of a book before. Not like in every single moment. It has that low level, eerie, strange feeling throughout, that foreboding feeling, which I tend to really love in books, especially when it's done right. I think a lot of authors try to do it but don't succeed. This one definitely has it. But there are also like a couple scenes which are like burned into my brain. Again, not like really graphic, but like frightening. So there's that. It's definitely more horror inflected than In Ascension, which is a little bit more sci-fi-y, I would say. both very literary interpretations of those genres, or using those genres in an otherwise literary novel though, and this one has those kind of cerebral, sciencey asides that you'll be familiar with if you know and love In Ascension. So it's all couched in this kind of cerebral idiom, very philosophical as well, and kind of abstract at times. And they both have a similar kind of writing style as well, which is like slightly distant, slightly submerged. And it's something I really love. It won't work for every reader, but I really like that kind of strange, distance, alienated kind of style. So does it get a little too cerebral at times, to the point where you're like, I'm not sure I can quite go with you to that extreme? Yes, maybe. It becomes a little ridiculous just here and there. It's just a bit over the top. But also you could argue that that is the characterization of these strange protagonists. But in general, I just loved it. Obviously, he's covering everything about the world we live in now. You know, when people talk about, like, you know, novels of the now or whatever, like this kind of book really sums up now for me in some ways. Not in all ways, but in some ways. The park that has been closed to the public and is the home of these bonobos is owned by a mining conglomerate, and obviously Shell feels a little bit complicit in that whole thing herself. And so it's talking about the contradictions of late stage capitalism, about our relationship with the non-human, about our relationship to tech, and that is covered in this baffling first chapter, which is not to do with John or Shell or any character or any plot line. It's a description of a kind of social media service / app thing called Nest, which essentially displays the user's pattern or nest on the screen, and the nest is determined by all of your movements throughout the day. So even your micro movements that you're not even aware of and that are unconscious, this all goes into creating your nest, which then obviously people begin to interpret in various ways. So you might look at your nest to see how a job interview's gone, because even though maybe on the surface it felt like it went well, maybe your micro reactions to their micro reactions, you know, their subtle body language and your subtle body language, you'll be able to read what exactly happened there, kind of thing. And he goes through all the implications of what an app like this might do to the world in a way that really shows off his intelligence. I mean, he is a clever guy and it's very, very impressive. It takes a minute to work out like what exactly he's saying, and finding the ways in which that first chapter is relevant to the John and Shell story is interesting. It has a frustrating ending. I'm not so bothered about that. You could say the ending is a little bit of a cop-out, but I kind of think I know what he's doing there. But be warned, this is not a book where you get the answers. You know, we're following John in this strange house. We're following Shell as she tracks these bonobos and observes them. And she begins to feel like, are they being hunted by something? Are the animals being hunted by something? Will you get all the answers? No. But will you enjoy the process and the way that this book makes you feel? I think so. And I think it'd be fun to delve back in and interpret this. When I read In Ascension, I read it once and then I read it again, and then we talked about it for book club, and we came up with a really nice theory, I think, for that book that became much more apparent to me on my second read. So I think this would be quite a fun one to read for a second time and really delve into some of its symbols and the stuff that's happening inside it. Overall, I think you'll know from my description whether this book is for you or isn't for you. It definitely reminded me of Annihilation at times, especially because we have this group of female scientists going on a research trip, this sense of unease permeating the whole thing. It also sometimes reminded me in its theming of Ned Bowman's Venomous Lumpsucker, which is completely different in style, that's more satirical, more humorous, more silly. But it's interesting to see maybe whether two of these overlap, even though they're completely different stylistically in terms of like what they're saying about the global situation that we're in. However, I think even if you enjoyed In Ascension, you're not guaranteed to like this one. But do I feel like they absolutely came from the same writer? Yes. I think they're siblings 100%. I can see MacInnes's individual stamp as an author here, but it is probably... I do think there is something human to his writing, otherwise I don't think I would like it. I do think there is an underlying thrust of emotion that you don't always get from books like this, and a human connection. So I do think that's definitely present. Perhaps though because it's not a first-person narration like Lee's is in Ascension, and it's slightly less focused and it's a bit more puzzling, I think that would probably throw some readers off, even if you liked In Ascension. Okay, next up, Beware of Pity by Stefan Zweig, who was an Austrian author. Well, let's see his dates of birth. 1881 to 1942 he lived. He's having a little bit of a renaissance at the moment. Everybody seems to be reading Stefan Zweig. He's mostly known for like quite short, like novels / novellas. This is his longest book he ever wrote, and possibly a weird place to start then for me, because this is the first book of his that I've read. So it's translated from the German by Phyllis and Trevor Blevitt, and it's about an army officer, Anton Hofmiller. He's stationed in this rural town in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he's young and he's naive, and he gets invited somehow to the Herr von Kekesvalva, I want to say, the rich local landowner's home, and there he has a very glamorous evening and he's having the most wonderful time, and then he commits a bit of a gaffe. He hasn't yet noticed that the host's daughter hasn't stood up because he arrived a little bit late, and so he goes up and asks her to dance, only to find that she is unable to walk, and it sets off a reaction in her. Obviously she would love to be dancing if she could, and this sends Hofmiller into a spiral where he only seems to dig himself into a deeper hole of pity, and leads him into situations that he doesn't want to be in, and basically changes the course of his life forever. I know that in the German it's called Impatience of the Heart, which I think I prefer, especially when I found out the differences between different forms of the word pity in German and how they might be translated. I would translate them differently, I think, into English. But anyway, that's a whole different... We did this for book club, so we got into some of that. But anyway, this is a tough read, I think, because you're obviously following someone in an extreme anxiety spiral for like many, many hundreds of pages, and it's very, very intense, and you just want to shake him at so many points and just wish that someone would give him halfway decent advice. Also, obviously, in terms of the language surrounding disability, the book not only reflects the time period, but also because we're kind of in the perspective of Hofmiller for all of the novel, the way he reacts to Edith is pretty awful. Even the way she talks about herself is pretty unbearable to read. So certainly that strikes modern ears quite uncomfortably. I do think Zweig's whole goal with the book is to show us, obviously, how dangerous pity can be and how poorly we deal with disability in our societies, and unfortunately a lot of it still feels very relevant. The way the characters talk about Edith, the way they direct her life for her. By the way, the introduction to this is, I think, awful. The way that the person who introduces this, Joan Asosella, talks about Edith is not how I read her at all. I definitely read her as having a very normal reaction to living a life which is so circumscribed, not just by her disability, but by the people around her and how they treat her because of her disability. So that's definitely my reading. It's clear to me, reading the introduction to this edition, that that is not everybody's reading of it, but certainly the focus is on Hofmiller, not so much on Edith, in terms of he is the one at fault, and also so is the society that surrounds him and surrounds the two of them even. But something to be aware of. I think for me, yeah, it was kind of a little too intense in that respect for me to like truly enjoy reading the book. But I do appreciate it. I appreciated all the different kind of mirroring situations throughout it, where Zweig really gets into the nuances of the different forms of power dynamics in the different relationships throughout the book. because I think that's where he really elevates it. Like, it's not just about Hofmiller and Edith, it's about various other characters and their partners, or their, you know, the people in their lives, and the different power dynamics at work. And I can see why he's called an anatomist of the heart, or the anatomist of the deceitful heart, it says on here, because he has that sense of like human psychology. He really gets it. I do think I might prefer some of his more condensed work, so I'm really looking forward to trying some of his shorter work. So yes, whilst I appreciated this probably more than I liked it or enjoyed reading it. Okay, we have another McKillip. This is The Bell at Sealey Head by Patricia A. McKillip. She was a fantasy author. She has a bit of a cult following, does McKillip. She's never been like super popular, but those who love her seem to really love her. And she often had these incredibly beautiful covers done by a woman called Kanuko Y. Craft. I hope to own all the books with the beautiful covers, and all of the McKillip books, to be honest, because I find her a fascinating author. And she's a little bit unusual in the fantasy genre in that she often wrote standalones. So she was working kind of like 80s, 90s, early noughties, that kind of period. She's a bit of an outlier because she wrote a lot of standalones. She did write a few series, I think, but a lot of standalone fantasy novels, which is unusual in itself. But also they would all number about 250 to 300 pages, which again is unusual to create these like condensed, small, complete worlds in just the one novel. So I read Umbria and Shadow, gosh, was it last year? Or was it the year before that? And I really liked it. It's very dreamlike and strange. This one was a bit more straightforward, but one thing I really like about McKillip is that she's a very enigmatic, mysterious author to me. I can't quite work her out. I can't quite put my finger on her and what she's doing in her books. And I like that in an author, when they make me think, like, what is your purpose? What are you doing in these novels? Because they're certainly more elevated than your typical fantasy as well. They're sort of often very thematically interesting, but they don't offer you very easy answers, I don't think. So yeah, I think she was quite a shy and retiring lady as well, which just makes me think about like how she's presenting in her books and what she's doing in them. So I really look forward to reading more of her books. This one, as I say, is more straightforward than Umbria and Shadow. It reads as quite a charming, cozy-ish story about a community that lives in a seaside town in a sort of British-ish environment. A Victorian era, again-ish, like adjacent. And every day at sundown, as the sun sinks into the sea, they hear a bell that does not correspond to any real bell in the area. Many people don't think anything of it, but the book is really about the untangling of that mystery, and we go into all sorts of wonderful, fantastical places which conjure up images much like the one on the front of the book, and yeah, really give me the delight that I would have felt as a child reading a fantasy book. So she manages to capture something of that, the true magic of fantasy and great fantasy writing. But also I think there's more to this book than that. We're offered some answers but not others once you start reading closely. So it presents this quite like kind of charming, complete story, but then you're left with a few interesting questions. And yeah, I find her work intriguing. Where would I recommend starting? I think I would still start with Umbria and Shadow, just to get a sense of the kind of author McKillip can be before moving on to something like this, which is a bit more straightforward, but I think has those like touches of strangeness underneath the surface. But anyway, I will keep reading McKillip and keep updating you on her work. I have a very recent release from NYRB here. This is The White Bear by Henrik Pontoppidan, and I just want to show you the cover of this one too. It's a very cool painting of an icy world. What's it called? A View of the Icy Ocean, Walrus Fishing by the Greenlanders, 1841, by Françoise Auguste Biard. I heard about Henrik Pontoppidan first, and sorry if I'm saying any of this wrong, from a book club member, Courtney, and I will leave her Instagram down below actually, and she read Lucky Purr, which I think has been re-released as A Fortunate Man by NYRB recently, and that's known as his masterpiece, and she really liked that. But when I was buying some books for myself the other day and looking at the selection of NYRB that they had, they did not have A Fortunate Man, but they did have this, which is their other recent release from him, The White Bear, which is 2 stories. I wouldn't even call them novellas, they're like 2 long stories. The White Bear is one, and the other is called The Rearguard. And I really liked one, and the other I found a total slog. Pontoppidan, by the way, is a Danish Nobel laureate, writing kind of at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And these, I think, were published around 1887, which I didn't know until I'd finished them, and I was like, okay, that makes the style of them make a lot more sense. The first one, which I really liked, is about a priest called Thorkild Müller, but he is a very eccentric man. He is pretty much ostracised by his peers. He's a bit of an oddball. He's very tall and very quiet, and he is essentially punished for being unpopular by being sent to Greenland to convert the locals, the Inuit peoples that live there. And instead he ends up being converted himself, basically, to their way of life, and lives with them for many, many years. And the descriptions of Greenland are just perfection. As we know, I've been on a saga journey this year, or I'm kind of in the middle of a saga journey. I enjoyed the long ships. I reread The Greenlanders. And so I am just sort of interested in anything set in that area. And so, of course, I so enjoyed the descriptions of Greenland and people's way of life there and all of that stuff. Then he returns to Denmark at some point, and they hate him there because he's very popular with the locals. He's a bit of an eccentric. He's very like down with the people kind of thing, and his other priests hate him and basically chase him away. All of this I really enjoyed. The descriptions of Thorkild himself are just ridiculous and a lot of fun. It kind of reminded me of like a Danish Dickens a little bit, because it's obviously contemporaneous-ish, and so I really enjoyed that. And there's one description of like the opening scene in Greenland, when he gets to Greenland, which I just won't forget. I just think it's so beautifully written. And then there's The Rearguard, which is about a pair of newlyweds. They are living in Rome. They're Danish, but they're living in Rome for a time. One is called Jørgen Hallager, and he is a staunch socialist, and he is a social realist painter. So he's, going down the back streets and finding the marginalised in society to paint. And his wife is this upper middle class woman called Ursula Brandt, and she comes from like a conservative political family, and she is obviously in Rome to appreciate the like high art and the Renaissance art that is everywhere, and they basically both want to try and convert the other one to their way of thinking, and the whole story is really about that. Now, I do appreciate that it demonstrates Pontoppidan's like own sort of approach to politics in his own life. Like, he was sympathetic to the socialist causes but never really got involved with those, and kind of his work, and I can see it even from what I've read here, like toes the line of social realism, but not quite. It's not quite there. But it's like realism to some degree. But then on the other hand, you can see that whilst he's not a conservative, like in the book, in the story at least, like he has an appreciation for like the high art and the veneration for this kind of older art form, these older art forms and older stories. I think, and neither character quite comes off perfectly. Each character's arguments are given their due, or each side's arguments are given their due. So it's really about this battle between these two ways of thinking. However, there's not a lot of like, why are these two people together? We never really understand. There's not a lot of like world building in the other ways, like of the characters, their relationship, their world. It's really about these two political spheres coming and clashing with one another. I just found it a bit of a slog, especially because I didn't really like either character on that basis. So yes, Jørgen particularly is pretty awful to listen to. He just rants and rants and rants. I struggled to get through that one, but The White Bear I really did enjoy, and I will be trying out his novel as well. Okay, next up is Olivia Laing's Funny Weather, Art in an Emergency, which is a selection of their writings from the years before the publication of this book, which is 2020, I think. Frieze articles, short author biographies, I'm not sure where they originally appeared, various different essays, reviews of books, conversation with another artist. They write mostly art criticism of all kinds, including books, including music, but also a lot of visual art. And in general, it just made me appreciate a lot of things. It inspired me, it made me want to go and look at some art. I don't know anything about visual art particularly, and the first part of the book are mostly focused around visual art. So yeah, it made me want to go look at some art, it made me want to make some art. Their criticism is just great. It reminds me that criticism is an art in itself. Throughout, it was extremely well written, engaging, compelling. I really liked that I was able to just dip into it. Each piece was no more than a few pages long. So, you know, when you're having a busy day, you can just dip in, learn something new about art, and enjoy some great criticism. So I enjoyed it on that basis a lot. I particularly enjoyed the artists' biographies from the beginning, because I felt like that was stuff I really didn't know, and they write them really well, as I say, like really engaging, compelling way. And it also made me want to read more criticism more often. Unfortunately, I don't think many people are writing criticism at this level at the moment in a lot of stuff, but I'll keep looking. I think if you knew a lot about art, you might not enjoy this as much. I don't think it would strike you as anything new particularly. Also, obviously it's got the subtitle Art in an Emergency, and apparently it's supposed to be a little bit about, well, exploring whether art can change anything, whether art is revolutionary, what effect art has on the world and on politics, because a lot of these essays and things were being written obviously through things like, what does she say here, Brexit, Trump's first presidency, Grenfell Tower fire, racist killings by American police. And so they do touch on these things sort of throughout the collection, but because it's a collection of like disparate writing, is it a particularly focused examination of this topic? I wouldn't say so. I know that some reviewers have taken issue with that. I personally am not that bothered. I knew going in that it was a collection of essays. I wasn't really expecting much in general, because I tend to find essay collections can be very disappointing for me. They can be a bit vapid, a bit shallow, a bit scattered, especially when they look a bit like this. I love this cover design so much, but it also looks so much like a lot of other essay collections, which I really don't like. We read this for our non-fiction pick for the last quarter in book club, and I'm really glad I was made to read it. Not made to read it, but like I had a real reason to read it, otherwise I don't think I would have picked it up, and I really enjoyed my time with it. But yeah, do I think it's an extended examination of some of these themes and topics? Not really. But was it an enjoyable read for me? Yes, and I would like to read more of their work. Okay, I reread The Ministry of Utmost Happiness by Arundhati Roy for book club for July, and I really enjoyed it a second time round. I first read it not long after it came out in 2000. I can't remember, I might have read it in 2018, but it came out in 2017, and I remember finding it pretty challenging, but ultimately very rewarding, and I kind of agree with my past self. I found it to be the same again. Arundhati Roy won the Booker Prize back in the 90s for The God of Small Things, and then took an extended break from fiction, writing a lot of non-fiction, working a lot in activist spaces, and she brought all that to bear on this book, which is very informed, I think, by a lot of her activism. The main two things, she's looking at the run-up basically to the election of Narendra Modi in 2014 for Prime Minister in the general election. So this kind of shift towards right-wing populism, Hindu nationalism in India. She's looking at that kind of period in the run-up, the years running up to that. Particularly, she looks at, I would say, like two major events: the Gujarat riots in 2002, which Modi, I think, kind of presided over Gujarat at the time, and then the occupation of Kashmir as well, and quite a lot of it is set in Kashmir in the second half particularly. So those are the two like big issues that she covers in this book, and of course they're interrelated as well. So the first parts of the book, I would say, is quite not a scattered book, but it's meandering, I would say, in a good way. We go through various different things, various different voices, archival material, you know, people's notebooks. We have one first person narrator chucked in there, letters and someone's manifesto. Like, it's created of lots of different things, and it sometimes takes a minute to orient yourself in the storyline as a whole. We encounter a whole new character, a whole new kind of subplot, and so it takes a while to like piece together the whole thing. So that's one of the reasons why it's challenging. It's also challenging for readers, any readers that are not super familiar with the ins and outs of politics in India around that time, or exactly what's happening in Kashmir. So it takes a bit of Googling to kind of work out exactly what's going on, especially because she generally doesn't name people directly. So for example, you have to work out who she's referring to when she refers to the chief minister or whatever it might be, which I think is Modi. The first part of the book focuses on Anjum, who is an intersex woman slash Hijra, as she prefers to be called. Yeah, a transgender intersex people and community that have like been grouped under this name in South Asia for many centuries. So yes, she uses that term herself, and she is born and raised in Delhi, in Old Delhi, and the first parts of the novel are really about her life. She is definitely my favourite character in the book. She is so charismatic, she's so interesting, and I think most people that read this book, she tends to be like the core, the heart of the book, and she is kind of the heart of the book in general, and like her role over the course of the whole book. And then in the second part we move more into the Kashmir section, and we kind of follow a group of students who end up like on opposite sides to one another in the conflict. And then the storylines do slowly begin to converge over the course of the book. One thing I had kind of forgotten about the book from my first reading was its voice, particularly the Anjum sections. It has this like slightly distanced, kind of almost satirical but not quite, but like kind of warm and loving voice that picks out the foibles of these characters, but in a warm way. And so in a book which covers otherwise very dark things, that humour and lightness from the voice itself and the way things are narrated in this like lively, engaging manner really kept me reading and kept me going. In general, again, I found it to be a moving read, a really interesting read, an enlightening read, and I enjoyed returning to it. It reminds me I need to reread The God of Small Things as well, which I think is quite different stylistically. Okay, next we have The Old Drift by Namwali Serpell, and this is the book I got stuck in for ages. It's about 550 pages long, and it covers three families with three generations each, who came together in the, I think it's early 20th century, on the banks of the Zambezi. One incident kind of entangles their lives forever, and so we follow the three families, one Italian, one British, one Zambian, through three generations. And there's a little bit of magical realism chucked in there as well. So I think you might know what my problem is with this book, even just hearing me describe it like that, because it's too many characters, too many generations to really get to grips with or care about any of them in any real depth. The incident that supposedly sets off the whole book, and I've read a few books which have that kind of event, that initiating event at the very beginning, which leads to the events of the rest of the book. I never felt that it was really weighted in the way that it needed to be. I never really felt that we were watching three families' entanglements because of that specific event. So even from right at the beginning, I was already a little like thrown off, lost, a bit like, okay, why do they keep encountering one another? The magical realism element had a little bit of a similar thing, and again, this is very common, where it'll kind of be established at the beginning and then it will get lost and you'll think, well, why was it there in the first place? I am tiring a little bit, or I'm just not in the mood at the moment for generational stories as well anyway. To be honest, I don't think we even got the foundational generation anyway, where we really cared for the foundational generation, but very often it's hard to maintain your interest across multiple generations when you don't have that foundational stuff. There was a lot of good writing in here, a lot of like humorous moments and some like real wit to it. The best bits by far and away, and it must be about 6 to 10 pages in the whole book, are these like page-long interludes by a swarm of mosquitoes in the Zambezi River. And the wordplay there, and the imagery, and the metaphors, and the way she embodies the voice of the mosquitoes was so interesting and really, really well done. And I just wish there'd been more of that in the body of the book itself. I think she was attempting maybe a voice not dissimilar to, say, Roy, the one that Roy employs in The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, but it just wasn't quite there yet. So this is a debut novel. I think it reads and feels like a debut, a very ambitious debut. And in that way, sometimes it reminded me of like The Parisian as well by Isabella Hamad. Like, it just wasn't quite there. It wasn't quite tight, taut enough, thought through. Lots and lots and lots of potential here. Obviously, the novel is looking at Zambia as it becomes independent and as it moves towards the future. And there's some like tech stuff going on at the end of the book, and there's lots and lots and lots of potential here, and I would definitely read more of her work, but it just felt like a very big baggy debut and it didn't quite keep me interested throughout. Okay, next we have A Psalm for the World Built by Becky Chambers, and I laugh because I think I'm going to piss some people off with this one. I really didn't like this book, and I know she is much loved in the science fiction world. It is not for me, this book, not for me at all. So what happens in it? A monk has become dissatisfied with their life, and they decide to become a tea monk, where they're going to go out and like provide like tea therapy for people via cups of tea and a bit of a chat. Which is all very cosy and cute, but they're still not satisfied, so they go out to the forest, the wilderness. The world is like, we're in the far future, the world has been like split into communities of humans and like wilderness, and many years ago the robots just became sentient somehow and wandered off into the wilderness, never to be seen again. But somehow this monk comes across a robot and they strike up a friendship of sorts, and they discuss, I guess, life and philosophy and stuff. I find this brand of like cozy techno-optimism very insidious. I don't like it. I don't like what I believe it is truly saying. I found this to be pretty shallow in its theming and what it was saying about the world. It's not my thing. It's not my cup of tea. Tea monk. I just find it very empty. I don't think it's great on a story level. I don't think it's great on a ideology level. It doesn't stand up to any scrutiny like the world she's built here. Like, not on a scientific level, not on a like sociological level. Like, would people live like this happily? I don't know. Is this really a utopia? I hope the point is that it's not a utopia, but it doesn't stand up on a character level or a story level or like a human psychology level. It doesn't work for me. And I like rigour in my books. I like everything to really mean what it says and say what it means, and for the theming to be like complex. This is something like I find it niggles at me in science fiction, like when things are not thought through to like the bottom of their implications, and there's so much change here and not all of it makes sense and it's just not logical, and I just couldn't get on with it. So sad to say, this is not for me at all. And I'm really, really sorry to all of you who are fans of this one, but I had to speak my truth. Okay, I don't recommend it. Another big disappointment for me was Irene Solà's When I Sing Mountains Dance, which is on the other side of the spectrum, I would say, like very literary translated fiction. And I've heard many good things about this over the years, and I just really didn't get on with this at all. I think this is definitely more of a taste thing. Like, this book doesn't disturb my soul as much as the Chambers book, which just gets under my skin. By the way, if you want a similar kind of book, but that I think has a little bit more depth to it, I'd really recommend the Nevo Singing Hills cycle, which I would say is still not like my favourite books in the world, but I think they do a little bit of what Chambers is doing in that book, but more successfully. Anyway, When I Sing Mountains Dance, so I've heard a lot of good things about this. It just wasn't my style, it just wasn't my thing. It just sums up a lot of the things, or it epitomises a lot of the trends that like are not my kind of thing at all and that I don't particularly like in contemporary fiction. Did I say it's translated from Catalan? It's set in the Pyrenees. The clouds are moving across the sky. We open in their point of view and they strike Dominic, a poet farmer, with lightning, and he dies and this has ramifications, I guess, for his family. Do we fully explore those ramifications? I don't know. The whole novel is written in various different points of view of all sorts of different things. We've got clouds, we've got Dominic's wife, thankfully, we've got chanterelles that he was carrying, we've got the mountain itself that has a chapter from its perspective. Again, I think you know what I'm going to say. There's not a through line here. It's too scattered. It's very beautiful, it's very poetically written, but I feel like that's covering up, all this stylistic experimentation is covering up the fact that Solà is not really sure what she wants to do in this book. There's actually two major events which happen, and we're not really sure which one we're supposed to be focused on. There's also the addition of the Spanish Civil War kind of chucked in there. We get stuff from ghosts, but it's not like really explored in any real depth. Obviously, it's quite a short little book. I just wasn't sure. She quite knew where her focus was. The opening chapters I liked. I kind of got it. We get a chapter from the perspective of the ghosts of some witches, which is quite fun. But when we got to the chanterelles, it just lost me. Then we have loads of characters who we have to work out who they are, how they fit into the story. I have a pet peeve of like generalisy sentences. Like one that just annoyed me was like, oh, emotions, we feel emotions more deeply up here in the mountains. Like this kind of sentiment, I just can't get on board with it. By all means, explore that theme, but we need more than just the sentence alone to do it, or the passage alone to do it. It needs to be throughout the whole book. If that's what you want to say, you've got to say it more. So I don't like when that kind of generalized sentence is kind of just chucked in there. I thought the translation was wacky. Sometimes it had real Britishisms in it. Sometimes it was very like it had Americanisms. So it felt unmoored voice-wise and not very Catalan at all. I like my translations to feel a little bit like they're from the place that they were originally from. I felt like it was being transposed. Like at one point the like witches are transposed into some like very strange archaic Cockney, which just like threw me right out of what was going on. For me, not cohesive enough, not enough depth, and just a bit all over the place. Once we got a little bit more storyline at the end, I was like, oh, potential. Like this could have been good if we'd really focused on that story, that, you know, the thing that brings it all together, but doesn't quite get there. However, enough potential for me to consider reading her next book, which has just been published in English. I Gave You Eyes and You Looked Toward Darkness, I think it's called. The writing is beautiful, but you need other things for a good novel, in my opinion. So, not for me. I just found the reading of it like a slog. Like, Sound for the Wild Built, I could like race through it. It wasn't like too... It was a little boring, but it wasn't like too sloggy. But that one I was like slogging through it. So I knew I was going to be a bit negative today because obviously I just feel like I haven't had a great summer of reading. Final book, which I'm going to be negative about, is China Miéville's Iron Council. This is one of his Baslag books, so set in this particular world, particular universe that he created. I really love Perdido Street Station. I really love The Scar. They're some of my favourite Miéville books. So it's such a shame that I really didn't get on with this one at all. I did switch to audio about 150 pages in because I was like, I'm never going to get through this otherwise. I want to be a Miéville completist, so I pushed through, but man, was it painful. So this one, they're all slightly different and they're all like loosely connected. They're mostly just set in the same world. This one is obviously supposed to be a kind of Western style thing. So, and it's also involving a train, like a runaway train. So that's quite fun. Should have been a really great concept. Unfortunately, it just didn't work for me. I got so annoyed with it that I actually stopped trying to work out what was wrong with it, and I was like, let me just finish it. So some readers don't like that it's very overtly political, this one. This one really espouses Miéville's socialist views. It's really about revolution and like how revolution actually works in the real world and how difficult it is, and the nuances of trying to bring like a fractured people together in order to fight something like monolithic, and yeah, all the different like factions and the things that happen when you're trying to bring about a revolution of a kind, because what's happened is New Crobuzon has been kind of like cracked down upon and is sort of sliding to the right. At the same time that there's this like interminable war going on with a neighbouring nation, which people are like, is there any actual reason why this war is happening? So that's like the political climate that the book is operating in. And again, but this is the kind of thing I don't really have an issue with. The problem was like the novelty aspect. So we didn't have a central character that we could like. The storyline was too scattered. I don't feel like Miéville really believed in the story, or particularly the characters he was giving us. It was just dragged, so the plot was very thin because the characters weren't very good, and it was like stretched out over many hundreds of pages. A lot of repetition, a lot of just stuff I just didn't care for. And I again, with Miéville's prose, sometimes if you don't have that thing to latch onto, that character, that scene, then you just bounce off it. And I bounced off this one. I could not get my eyes to read it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it just wasn't, I don't know. And he's such a good world builder. There was so much potential here, but like, it just isn't a successful novel, I don't think. I kind of just hated everyone. And again, I don't really need likeable characters, but I need characters who I can understand that they're like human beings and that they have something to them, charisma of some kind, a magnetism to them, and none of these had that for me. I just did not care. I just couldn't care. I'm very sorry to report that. I'm very sad to report that. I even think you could just straight up skip this one, even if you liked the first two. But you know, what we do to be completist, huh? Anyway, that is everything. I hope you enjoyed today's video roundup. There's definitely going to be some more good books in next month's video. I've read Frog by Mo Yan, which I really enjoyed. I've read the Mobius book by Catherine Lacey, so I'm looking forward to reviewing those for you. But yes, thank you all so much for watching today, and I will see you again soon. Bye.